This is an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Another star has dimmed in Hollywood. Conrad Janis, who was a prolific character actor of TV, film, and stage, best known as Pam Dawber's dad in Mork Mindy, died on March the 1st in Los Angeles at the age of 94. I had the pleasure of talking to Conrad back in October of 2001. He was such a multifaceted talent, and there was so much to talk about. Here is part of that conversation now.
I don't even know where to begin because you've done so much. I mean, you were talking about your jazz band. I mentioned Mork and Mindy. You started out actually as an actor in your childhood, didn't you?
Well, yeah, I was a child actor. I was in my prepubescent years, early teens, and I was acting on Broadway in a show called Junior Miss, which we then took all over the country. And Moss Hart was the director of that. And then I came to California and did a bunch of movies. I went under contract to Fox in the 40s, and then went back to New York City and started doing television. You were talking about series. The first series I did was a show called Jimmy Hughes, Rookie Cop, and it was for the old Channel 5 Dumont, which was, I think we only had one or two channels in those days, and they had cameras that were literally wired together, held together with Scotch tape, and it was a very decrepit studio, and this series was quite popular, but the leading actor, Jimmy Hughes, who played the rookie cop, kept quitting, so I was now the third Jimmy Hughes rookie cop, and the people would tune in, and every couple of weeks there'd be a different Jimmy Hughes. But that didn't seem to bother people. I mean, they just accepted it. Well, he's changed now. He was Billy Redfield, then he was an actor named Donald Buca, and then I took it over.
I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of child actors from your era, because there are people like yourself who worked for long years as a young actor.
Dickie Van Patten.
Dick Van Patten, who was on this program, and also another one who was on this program just a couple of weeks ago. We had the original Dobie Gillis.
Oh, right.
Dwayne Hickman. And the thing that I always find interesting is you always hear of two kinds of stories from child actors. You always hear the absolute horror stories, and then you hear the stories like the three of you that I've just mentioned, who are just the happiest people I know with great memories. As I was talking to our producer off air, he was telling me when he was lining you up on the phones here, they said, gee, they sound like such nice people.
Oh, well, isn't that sweet? Well, you know, Dick Van Patten and several of us who started back in the theater in New York, and we've been working all our lives, and it's been absolutely fabulous. I've done several dozen Broadway plays. I've done bunches of movies. I've done hundreds of television shows. I also have my jazz band. I'm directing movies now and acting in them. We just did a film that my wife Maria wrote and produced and acted in called The November Conspiracy. It was a wonderful kind of a suspense story with George Segal and Elliot Gould in it. I directed it, and she's now working on 14 other projects.
Wow.
And many of which I will direct. One of them is called Riches to Ragtime, which is going to be a story about a bunch of musicians who get together and then eventually work their way down to New Orleans to enter a jazz contest down there. And she's got all kinds of stuff going. So we've been able to kind of live our lives doing things that we absolutely love doing, and I can't think of anything better to do.
You mentioned some of the people you started working with, like Dick Van Patten, and I asked this question of him. I'll ask it of you. Was it a difficult transition to go from juvenile actor to adult actor? Because sometimes the powers that be, the bookers, the producers, the casting agents, have a problem with people growing up.
Well, you know, when we started off, we were doing teenagers, right? And it was terrific because there weren't a lot of teenage stars. In fact, there weren't any back on Broadway. So you had as good a chance to get a role as anybody did. And if you're going to start in the business, the way to start is young because there's much less competition. When you get into your 20s and 30s, that's when you go, well, if you want a leading role, well, we can get Paul Newman, we can get Brad Pitt, we can get, and so on and so forth. But when you're a young actor, you're not against any kind of competition. As a matter of fact, I was starring on a CBS television show when Sidney Poitier spoke his first lines ever in a show. I was also starring on a Gulf Playhouse, where these are live television shows, those half-hour and hour dramas that we're talking about, that were back in the so-called golden age of television. And I had to play a concert in the afternoon. I had to miss a rehearsal, and so my agent said, well, there's this young actor who just came in from the Middle West, and he's never done anything, and he's a couple of years older than you, but if you sort of show him where to go and everything like that, he'll stand in for you for the, while you're at rehearsal and everything. So I said, well, what's his name? He says his name is Paul Newman. So he came over, and she said, give him $5. So he was such a nice guy, I gave him $10. That was Paul Newman's first job. I was in a play on Broadway called Time Out for Ginger with Melvin Douglas, which ran 2 or 3 years on Broadway. And they wanted to go on the road with it, but I didn't want to go on the road. So they said, well, here, this is the young actor we've hired who has never done anything before, but he's going to take your place. And his name, here he is. I'd like you to meet Steve McQueen. So when you're growing up, you meet all these people, and you see them, and they start out, and some of them get to be stars, and hundreds of them never go anywhere, never work again.
You do the big screen, the small screen, the Broadway stage. You're a musician. Is there one of those things that is your absolute passion, or do you just like them all equally?
Well, I don't know if you like them all equally, but whatever you're working on at the time, if I'm, you get so, one of the great things about working in the theater or on television or whatever it is, or even with a band, is that you get so involved in it. And when you really get involved and get emotionally attached to a project, it's like like a family. And whatever it is you're doing at the moment, that's your favorite thing to do. If I'm acting, then acting is my favorite thing to do. If I'm playing with my band, then playing with my band is my favorite thing to do. But my agent, very early on, my agent said to me, listen, you're going to have to make your mind up. You want to be an actor, you want to be a musician. So I thought to myself, I got to make a living somehow. And if I'm in between jobs as an actor, then I got to play with my band in order to make enough money to pay the rent. So I never gave up either one, and here I am now, and I'm still doing both.
I want to talk about some of the things you did on Mork and Mindy. How did you get that gig, Conrad?
Well, I tell you, I was in a series that Richard Benjamin starred in, that Buck Henry wrote, called Quark, Q-U-A-R-K. And the producer of it was Bruce Johnson, and we ran about a season on Quark. It wasn't a hit show, but the producer went over to Mork and Mindy, and he called me up and said, well, you've done Quark, now come over and do Mork. So I transferred over there. And
what was the experience like? I know you were on the show for a couple of seasons, and then you were gone for a season, or gone for a bit.
Yeah. I actually was. I did the first season. And at the end of the first season, they decided, and it was the biggest hit of the season. It was the #1 news show on the air. And so they decided, well, if one comedian is funny, then 3 comedians is going to be 3 times as funny, forgetting that the entire premise of the show was that it was like Stranger in a Strange Land. This fantastic character had landed from another planet, and all he knew about us was what he had seen on television. And so the concept was very funny. But if you add 2 other comedians to it, it just then became like a gag show or something like that. And then they got desperate, and they started showing, the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders and a lot of jiggle and stuff like that. And we went from #1 to number 62 in about a month and a half. After and of course, at that time, I wasn't on the show. So they decided, we better get back to the original show, so they brought me back. And once we got back again and got back onto what the original show was all about, which was this sort of very plain family who had a visitor from outer space who was absolutely insane. And that was sort of the fun of the show. And the identification for people looking in, I believe, is that they could say, that's just like our family. We're sort of a dysfunctional family, and what would it be like, or a normal family, let's put it that way. What would it be like if some crazy person if Mork landed in our house? And Robin was so charming and so, such a wonderful actor and such a great comedian that it sold the show. So we picked back up again, and eventually we had a long run.
That's great. Now, I want to go back a little further to the beginning of your career. Didn't your mother, Harriet, have some connection with show business?
Well, she was a painter and a sculptor and a writer, and she ran an art gallery with my father. My father was, for about 20 years or 30 years, the number one modern art gallery in the world, who was responsible for the showing of Pollock and de Kooning and he showed Picasso and Leger, and he even started the popularity of the pop art movement, for which I suppose we can either pat him on the back or damn him, one or the other. But at any rate, he was a very world famous art dealer, and my mother helped along with the gallery, and also wrote books on her own about music and painting, and she also had a jazz record company, and they recorded people like Sidney Bechet and Louis Armstrong and Wild Bill Davis and Billie Holiday and so on.
Wow. Now, since you come from a background that has creativity and business sense together, were they very accommodating when you said you wanted to go and be an entertainer?
Yeah, actually, the first job I got, I went down to audition for, and I got on the end of a line because there was a kid in my class who was in a show on Broadway, and I'd always done the leads in all the school plays, never thought about being an actor, and he said to me, gee, I'm going to audition for this show, Junior Miss, you want to come along with me? And so I thought, yeah, that might be kind of fun. So we get on line on the Lyceum Theater, and there were 450 or 500 young actors, and they marched us across the stage in groups of 6, and there were about 9 parts, and I got one of them. And so that was the start of the whole thing. So we played it on Broadway for a while, which was all right because my home was in New York City, but then they wanted to go on the road. So I announced to my parents that I was going on the road, and for some reason they said that was okay. I mean, I had to travel with either my mother, my father, or sometimes my uncles traveled with me because I was underage, and so I had to have a guardian. But it just occurred to me that years later, why would they have said okay? Why wouldn't they have said, no, you can't do that. You have to stay in school and finish your education. But they were quite open-minded about it, and they said, sure, that sounds like a wonderful thing to do. And there's a school in New York called Professional Children's School, and you can take a correspondence course and keep up with your studies, which, of course, I never did. But so I went on the road with the show, and by the time I got back, I was in my middle teens, and there was no, I loved the idea of being an actor, and there was no way I was going to go back to school. So that was that.
That was just a portion of the chat I had with the amazingly talented Conrad Janis. He died on March the 1st at the age of 94. As I mentioned, there was so much to talk to him about. When we spoke, it was just a month after the tragedy of 9/11. So not only did we talk about his very broad and wide-reaching career, we also chatted about how entertainers can do their part being socially conscious, especially during conflicts and wars. Plus, we also chatted about and to his equally talented wife, Maria, about the work that she had been doing. Sadly, Maria herself passed away just last September. The conversations I had with both of them can be heard in its entirety, including a few phone calls, as a Patreon reward extra. Visit patreon.com/The Stuph File Program to hear that.
You've just heard an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder. To hear any or all of the full hour-long shows, visit thestufffile.com. Stuph is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's thestufffile.com. A presentation of Flying Fish Communications.